Welcome. Thank you for being here. I'd like to thank the Chamber of Commerce Foundation for having us all here and for allowing me to moderate this panel on adaptation strategies that meet future challenges. Some of those challenges we've talked about this morning. We have challenges in the natural environment, climate change. We have nefarious actors attacking infrastructure and communities in various ways, war to near war to criminal enterprises, et cetera. So lots of challenges that we're that we're discussing today. But one of the key themes that we have been talking about is the need for partnerships across sectors, across expertise, especially public-private partnerships. And so I think, like I would say is representative for most of the panels here today, we have a fantastic spread of experiences and representation from federal government, from NGOs, from private sector, and from local government. So my name is Chris Beck. I'm the Chief Scientist and Vice President for Policy at the Electric Infrastructure Security Council. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we focus on trying to enhance resilience for widespread or large footprint, long duration electric power outages. We call those black sky events. And I'm pleased to be joined by Lauren Boas-Hayes, Senior Advisor for Technology and Innovation within the Department of Homeland Security, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Next is Jeff Bayard, who's the Vice President of Operations at Team Rubicon. Next to him is Jeff Terry, Vice President of Corporate and Social Responsibility and Sustainability at GAF. And finally, Mitch Reynolds, who's the Mayor of La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I want to discuss kind of one of the key themes that we're hearing as a framing mechanism about any kind of disaster. It's possible to surge response capacity, but not possible to surge post-event resilience capacity. That has to be built in, and that's where these public-private partnerships and forward-looking innovation and investment, both in infrastructure and in people, are important. And a topic that I'll start with that, but what we also want to get to is how do we create that market for resilience? How do we get citizens and entities at all levels? We're represented here by people that are forward-leaning on this, but we need to also think about how we drive that signal. So I'll start at the far end with Mayor Reynolds. I want to get your perspective on public-private partnerships, and I know that La Crosse, Wisconsin is on one end of the Mississippi River. We heard from a fellow mayor of yours at an earlier panel who's in a town in Louisiana, and some of the challenges that we'll start with maybe the Mississippi River focus. I know we'll talk about things broader than that, but some of these challenges with working with these public-private partnerships and how your experiences is and what maybe recommendations you might make to make things a little bit better.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Yeah, and I appreciate being here today. Thanks so much again to the Chamber for hosting us, and this has been a great experience. One of the things I think that we understood in relation to resiliency and sustainability in the city of La Crosse is that you got to have a plan, right? I mean, that's one of the things. It's one thing, and we've been talking about a little bit here in relation to having a national climate policy. And we have a local climate policy. We have a climate action plan that was approved earlier this year, and that will be our guidestone moving forward. And a lot of that plan involves private-public partnerships, which is fantastic. So we're doing that, but before that, we've been engaged with our energy provider, Xcel Energy, on a project we're doing a renovation at our wastewater treatment plant. It is the biggest public works project in the history of the city of La Crosse. It's massive. And there's a tremendous amount of resilience built into that, and among them is that we're going to be, and I'll get over my skis a little bit on this one because I don't have my wastewater superintendent here to guide me, but basically it's, one of the things that solid waste creates through the process of treating it is methane. So we're utilizing that methane to heat the solid waste to turn it into, to remove basically the liquids so that we can turn the solid waste, we get it down to a point where it's dry so that we can more easily utilize it and use it more readily use it for our agriculture that surrounds our community. But in the process, we've been working with XL Energy to help us with the engineering on that, but also with XL Energy to help create, so we're going to create energy with this methane gas through generators. And those generators will not only power the wastewater treatment plant, so taking off the grid, but it will also, we're working with XL Energy to build out a microgrid system because the wastewater treatment plant is also on the same island that our municipal center is. And we have electric buses now, so basically what we're going to be doing through the help with XL Energy to build out this microgrid is power our electric buses, which we already got the infrastructure in place for, again, with the help of XL Energy. And we're going to be powering that with our wastewater treatment plant. So it's like that classic poop to power.
Classic.
It works. It is amazing. So, and this is why this is complementary, is that obviously it helps us because we're, for those of you who don't know, wastewater treatment plants are an energy suck. We're spending over $1 million a year to keep that thing running. So that cost goes away, but also XL Energy has that ability to say, okay, this is in our portfolio now, which helps them meet their renewable goals, so it's mutually beneficial. And that's the key for private-public partnerships, is finding that mutually beneficial pathway forward. We have another situation that's really, then this happened several years ago, so we've been on this path for a long time, is we've taking the methane from the landfill. And one of the largest medical health providers in the state of Wisconsin, Gunderson Health System, has taken the methane from the landfill and using that at one of their larger facilities to heat that facility. So instead of that methane being emitted, if you will, or burned off from the landfill, that goes and used directly to offset the energy use of a major medical center, which is tremendous. Again, mutually beneficial. This is what really works. And then we pursue those things in relation to resiliency with flooding as well. And part of what we do with our stormwater utilities is provide credits for those organizations that put in retention ponds or for that deal with heat islands on their property and things like that, so that we are giving them the opportunity and the availability of credits so that they can decrease costs while increasing resiliency. There's a lot of things like that. Again, mutually beneficial. So when we got rid of the parking requirements for commercial enterprises, what we were saying to our businesses is, look, you don't have to use that land for parking. You can take that off those parking requirements. You can change that up, and we're decreasing your costs because you can increase the footprint of your building. So we're decreasing your costs, and you can expand your building, or you can pad your bottom line, whatever the situation, increase your margins, and at the same time, we're addressing the real need to curtail the amount of runoff from those parking lots. So a lot of different facets there, but again, we found ways to do this in a way that is mutually beneficial, and that's absolutely the key.
I think I want to keep going on that theme of mutual benefit, I think again, the importance of having these sorts of cross-sector, cross-expertise discussions, because those old practices probably existed because everyone's in their silo or cylinder of excellence, as it's sometimes called. But I think looking at those types of partnerships is important. Jeff, I know you wanted to pick up on that theme and your experience as a private sector contractor. And how you've been working to help build resilience in communities.
Yeah, thanks. I'm First and foremost, Mitch, I'm totally using poop to power, and I love that. I'm going to find a way to build that into the roofing sector.
That's awesome.
I'm not sure how, but we'll figure that out. You know, I think a number of things that you touched on that I'll build on. I think from a private sector perspective, and GAF is North America's largest roofing and kind of waterproofing manufacturer. So kind of if you haven't heard of GAF, you now have. We're on one of every 4 roofs. So just to give you a background, both commercially and residentially. But you know, for us, when we talk about climate adaptation, kind of in resiliency, we had to start looking kind of within and understanding how do we need to change the way we operate. Where is our manufacturing footprint located? What kind of stresses in kind of those communities are apparent that we needed to get our hands on around, just from a manufacturing and operations footprint perspective. But beyond that, we really started building a focus around how do you build a portfolio of products, services, and resources that can really help to address some of the challenges that we're seeing in communities all over, in our case, North America. And a great example was, you know, Mitt, you mentioned kind of the urban heat island effect. A big area of focus for us was building on partnerships that we had with the government across the greater LA city and county, whether it was Streets LA, kind of their school district, the Parks and Rec area, and really starting to take a neighborhood approach, leaning into addressing an issue like urban heat and the urban heat island effect, knowing the significant public health implications associated with that. So that was a proactive approach, and I can talk a little bit more about that if we get time to, or happy to talk about seeing significant increases or reductions in ambient air temperatures from taking community-wide approaches to both green spacing but also looking at hard spacing. That's a way to get out in front of kind of challenges that are going to make more resilient a community and households and what have you. But I'll kind of pivot that too, because there is a kind of a response, and how do you build resiliency into the response of disasters that we see. And we're talking about going down the Mississippi River. We're doing a lot of work in the Gulf region, kind of still actually in response to Katrina, because there's so many communities and households that have not found a sense of resiliency in their own lives, in their own households. So it's kind of working collaboratively kind of with the nonprofit community there, as well as kind of reaching into the governments to see where grant dollars are available, that we can benefit and leverage dollars that we're putting in to actually take blue roofs off of homes and put roofs back on those homes. And ultimately, because that is a symbol of a couple of things. It's a symbol of I'm not yet whole. And if we can take that blue roof off and actually start with a new, fresh roof, you know, they can start getting the other aspects of their lives back together. So, you know, Team Rubicon is an incredible partner of ours. You know, Jeff, we appreciate the work that you guys do. It's why we work so extensively with TR and others, many of you who are probably here in the audience as well. So I think there is a leaning into as well as a responding to, but in a way that hopefully is building resiliency for that most important person, that's a most important audience, who is that person impacted.
Great to be a moderator for a panel like this where one of the panelists just leads into the next panelist. So Jeff Bayard,
Sorry.
Yes.
please.
The lights are really bright if you've been on the stage, so it is real. But no, I really appreciate the chamber, appreciate the invite. My mind's working on, we're at 86 operations year to date within Team Rubicon, and I'd love to figure out how we do mobile poop to power to power our operations. That's pretty
let's
cool.
Go.
There we go. But, we're a little, obviously, we're a veteran-led response organization, so adaptivity, adapt, overcome, improvise is kind of in our DNA. But what we look at is, what are those trends? We are no longer, and I'm not any kind of data scientist of any kind, but what I am is a practitioner. We don't have seasons anymore. It floods year round. The only season that's definite is really hurricane season. Outside of that, it's all bets are off the table. So the majority of our operations this year have been around the floods. But what can we do to contribute? I look at resiliency from our lens is twofold. Where do we better mitigate those hazards that we know were going to happen? So we've really invested a lot, predominantly out in our western states, on doing fire mitigation. That is not a traditional operation for Team Rubicon, but the best response you can have to a disaster is no response because you've mitigated that hazard. So, we do a lot of work around that area. Over the past year, Curtis was up here earlier, great guy, great friend, and he talks about underserved communities. How do we make that community, what can Team Rubicon contribute to that? We can contribute with an exercise program, with qualified Homeland Security exercise practitioners that we have that can help them not just better themselves for a pending disaster, but it also enables them to be competitive for the federal grants that are necessary and the requirements that are around that. So, it's what are those steps, and people try to look at sometimes, and that's good, these giant steps, but, small steps get you in the journey as well. And so what are those small steps? Independent to what we do control, we've got a new initiative to reduce our single-use plastics on our operations. I'm convinced that wherever you end up, there will be a truckload of FEMA water there waiting on you. But what can we do to reduce that usage of the single-use plastics? So and then partnering with our great partners. We can't do what we do without partners, but, with GAF and others, when we do go in, hopefully that blue tarp's on there really, really good and it's hard to take off. But we want to put disaster survivors back in a better place than they started. And that's what we're committed to do. Our motto, our goal is really simple in Team Rubicon: serve more people.
Thanks. And Lauren, I want to ask you, sort of following up, keeping up with sort of the high-level theme of the public-private partnerships. So you have your leading efforts, and I'll come back to cybersecurity-specific stuff in a second, but just from a broader perspective, you have interactions within DHS, which is a big organization, across the federal family, out to state governments, local entities, and now also private sector entities. So just wanted to get your perspective on what you found important about creating, maintaining, strengthening those relationships and helping this collaborative effort so that we can find the mutual benefits that the mayor was talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that a great example of that is grant programs, which have been referenced already a few times on the panel. I mean, grant programs, right, across every single element of the federal government to state and local governments, to the private sector entities who may become the recipient of those grant dollars that may be building projects in local communities, right? And so I think for CISA, one of the things that we're focused on, I love the point that was made earlier about the importance of people feeling secure in their homes and feeling like they've got that solid foundation under them that may have been missing since Katrina, which was so long ago now. It feels so long ago, though for so many, I'm sure they're still dealing with the effects of that day to day. But also the sense of hopefully being excited about the major infrastructure investments that we are making right now, today, in this country. And for CISA, one of the things that is exciting about that is this opportunity to make sure that the next generation of American infrastructure is built with cybersecurity from the beginning. Because so many cybersecurity risks that we are living with today are the result of tech debt, right, are the result of having implemented systems that are now legacy, that need to be phased out, but that often takes time and money and resources. And so hopefully with this next generation of infrastructure that we're building, we'll be able to do that with cybersecurity in mind from the beginning. And so to use one example that touches on every single element of society, we look at something like the infrastructure bill, which is going to be moving about $1 trillion, right, into infrastructure projects. That is incredible. Like, I am so excited to hear about all of the incredible work that is going to happen in La Crosse and be delivered by the folks on this panel because of the infrastructure bill. And it requires us to make sure that each agency that's responsible for some of those grant programs to get that money out to communities, which often that money is then going to a state to distribute from there, that each element has accessible, understandable, and usable cybersecurity guidance so that we can just say, here's what it looks like for your grant program to be prioritizing and building projects that are cyber secure. And that's got to be accessible language for every single recipient of those grant funds so that we're not adding an unreasonable burden on the recipients, but instead adding a manageable element that makes everyone feel the cybersecurity is not only important to each project, but also a core element of what it really means to build resilient infrastructure here in the US.
Thank you. I heard that theme in the panel. I was in the breakout session about ensuring that, or looking at how requirements and resilience efforts can disparately impact communities. So I'm glad that you kind of led into that with your answer about trying to make these programs, or this funding, these grants, accessible. I wondered. I'll ping back down to the mayor, because we were all kind of talking about this in the back. But are there recommendations that can be made that would do what Lauren's talking about, that would try to get these things to be sort of more accessible, and therefore kind of rising tide lifts all boats type of thing?
You know, I'm sure there are, and I think that's one of the things that we have asked for. I'm also the Wisconsin chair of Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, and one of the things we've asked for is a way to make these grants, federal grants, some of the generational funds that we have out there, make that more accessible on the local level. Now, certainly having more requirements is not necessarily the best way to do that for us, not only for my community, but much smaller communities. However, I do understand the need. I will say that one of the things that we're working on requires very little cybersecurity, maybe boxes to check, and that's green infrastructure, like what we're working on in the Mississippi River with Ducks Unlimited, another private-public partnership. And Ducks Unlimited is working with MRCTI to identify and engineer and help build floodwater retention zones through up and down the Mississippi River. And again, one of these mutually beneficial relationships where we're improving habitat water ecology for migratory birds, which is essential to their mission, but at the same time, we're looking at resiliency for the entire Mississippi River corridor, because we're storing floodwater for large flood events, which helps. It's that disaster mitigation that we're all aiming to do. So because it's always much less expensive to do that than to respond to the disasters after they occur. So accessibility is key. I think making it. We have our cities, and I think cities everywhere, towns, villages everywhere, have experienced the very same thing. There's federal monies available. It is very difficult to access those on the local level. There are ways to do that so that it's easier. I would defer to those that are creating the barriers to take those down and find ways to do that. But we've tried to hammer that home over and over again. The funds are not getting to where they're supposed to go so that we can make real difference. They're not funds that are able to be scaled at a regional level, which is something that needs to be done. And I think that to make real change, especially in relation to resiliency, especially on the Mississippi River, that it needs to be done at scale, and there needs to be better access at the local level.
Excellent. An idea that I heard a little bit of one of the previous panels that Sean Griffin was talking about, how the newer technology can enable things like, the example he used was a firefighter to ask a question in like natural language question, rather than having to do the proper search terms, that kind of thing. And maybe something leveraging technology would be, instead of having to be an expert in how to fill out these complicated grant programs, we could just say, here are my needs, here's my entity, and that kind of thing. Maybe we could get that technology to work for us a little bit. I wanted to pick up on what you said, Jeff, earlier. The interesting point about that I hadn't thought about before was your point about you're thinking about climate change, but at a very local level. When you think about combating climate change, often is like, how do we get less carbon dioxide into the air? You're talking about urban green spaces. You're talking about water facilities and access to those kinds of like sort of urban cooling.
Sure.
I think looking at this from several levels. I wonder if you want to just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think we take very much an approach that change happens at the micro local level. And we have these big goals. You got companies out there making big goals around carbon, all this kind of stuff. Ultimately, that's not going to get us where we need to be. That's a part of the solution. We can't forget where the change needs to happen, and that is where people live, work, and spend their lives. And that's what we've done. I touched on LA a little bit, and it's kind of a story of kind of bringing innovation as well as local grassroots community engagement together to really take on something like urban heat. Pacoima is this kind of small community in just north of LA in the San Fernando Valley, and one of the hottest areas kind of in the greater LA area. Was just out there last week, and it's unreal when you look at this community and there's only 40% of the tree wells that are in the entire community actually have trees in them, because trees can't survive in there because it's so hot. So how do we start looking at multiple different ways to address issues like urban heat that has resiliency at its core, at a community level, and very importantly at a household level? So, we have 4 million miles of roads in the US alone. And just imagine if you could put a solar reflective pavement coating that actually doesn't lighten the road, but actually just kind of eliminates the long wave radiation that comes from infrared light from absorbing into those hard, dark surfaces. And you can actually reduce communities by doing this. And that's kind of what we've done in partnership with the residents of Pacoima, a number of kind of local NGOs, as well as many government agencies, and just to learn and to do something at its core to benefit the residents of that community, but at the same time learn from this, and then figure out, how do we scale it? How do you scale it? By leveraging existing maintenance budgets that departments of transportations have right now. And with the IRA coming out around climate adaptation solutions and addressing urban heat, kind of how do you bolster kind of approaches to better maintaining roads, for example, or parking lots, or walkways, or whatever they may be, and kind of bringing different approaches, so not always sticking with the same way in which we've always done things, but being creative and partnering kind of in a way that says, let's experiment, let's try, and let's learn, and if we fail, okay, that's fine, but then let's learn from that and do better the next time. And I think that's where the public-private partnership comes in, because when that happens well, you can find ways to scale those and playbook them so other communities can benefit from learnings we've had. So
Yeah, that's a cool example of taking advantage of diverse understanding, diverse expertise. The climate change example coming from a building trades person or a city planner, right? And not just, it's all solar panels and carbon emissions mitigation.
Unconventional partnerships can go long ways.
Jeff Bayard, in your, where you talked a little bit about pre-event mitigation, you talked about fire. But are other examples that you want to bring up, or other partnerships that you found important in tackling these? I kind of want these ideas to come up from.
I think that, like our partnership with GAF, when we kind of can go through the gamut of early response, and then, stabilization of homes, and then our rebuild program where we're rebuilding homes. I think, and there's other organizations out there too, but I think that partnership allows kind of a research and development situation as well. What works well, what doesn't work well. So always being open to new thoughts, new partnerships, and a different way of doing things. I think, Jeff hit on it. Just pedaling the bike faster, we know is not gonna solve the situation. We've got to look at it holistically, and then understand how do we attack that day to day, and that's the mitigation piece of it. When we look at communities, where we do well is like at the mayor level. He is the one that has to, answer to those citizens and make sure that they're protected and as resilient as possible. So, we utilize our partners, we utilize the data to make sure that we're in those communities that need those services the most, that are the highest on the vulnerability index and other metrics that we look at. But flooding is a real issue. Now, what we do in flooding, we're not engineers, right? But we can do some of that, and we have done it along the Mississippi, up and down the Mississippi, of putting our gray shirts in opportunities that can divert that flooding. Whether that's sandbagging or other things. But it's always looking at those emerging threats, and then building our internal processes, i.e. training and education, so that we're putting our gray shirts in the best possibility to do good, so that we can be a partner to everybody on help combat that.
Lauren, finally, I wanted to come back to something that you led off with that I found interesting, which is you talked about the cybersecurity challenge, and that a lot of it comes from legacy systems, older systems. You have these various levels of sophistication across that whole enterprise. And how are you, but that's a big thing to put your arm around. So I just want to give you the floor to say, what are some of the things that you're finding are effective, or that you're pushing to get out to help protect the public and the government?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we like to try to balance it in our minds at CISA is both those universal elements that are sort of the foundational risks that every single organization in America is facing, and the key controls you can put in place to reduce that cyber risk. And then the most sophisticated threat actors who are targeting a smaller segment of American business, government, and society, and how do we make sure we're addressing both of those simultaneously? And so I know E.A.D. Goldstein, who was speaking just prior, highlighted, for example, our cyber performance goals, which are really sort of those baseline standards that every single organization should be seeking to uphold when it comes to cybersecurity, to make sure that that sort of broad-based risk is addressed. And so there are key elements here, things like implementing multi-factor authentication, which I know is just not the highlight of anybody's day to have to fill out get that text message and put the number in. I totally understand. And it's also the case that all of the data shows it is one of the most effective things that we can do to reduce cyber risk, right? And so some of these things, they're not really sort of rocket science. They're sort of basic IT fundamentals, and yet they're really hard to pull off in complex environments, and we need to make sure we do it in a way that does, again, minimize that burden on the end user who's got to deal with those MFA codes, for example, right? So there are some of those sort of fundamental best practices which are really enshrined in those cyber performance goals that organizations can really take that list of goals and say, how is my organization doing against these, right? And what are we striving towards to improve upon in those areas to draw down that sort of fundamental risk?
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, already we're out of time. I knew the half hour was going to go super fast, but to that very last point, just to use two-factor authentication as an example, it's a little inconvenient, but it does make a huge difference. I do it now because I learned that it's one of the most effective things that you can do, and it is simple blocking and tackling. It does require some effort, but I think it also highlights maybe the theme that we were trying to get to, is that we're all in this together. Everyone needs to play a role, and doing something like that, it sounds simple, but if everyone does it and everyone chips in, that we'll be able to make this society more resilient. So please help me thank our wonderful panel.